Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow travelers. A very warm welcome to Tomás Saraceno. Now, it's wonderful that we can continue these conversations because actually, Tomás, we met a long time ago when I was teaching in 2000. I was professor at the UAF, the University in Venice. And we are there actually doing a seminar between art and architecture. The whole idea of going beyond the fear of pooling knowledge and bridging art and architecture was the aim of this seminar. It was basically my art seminar and then Stefano Boeri's architecture seminar. And you were at that time actually, you just had arrived actually in Venice and were a student in the seminar. And the very first day when we met, you suggested that from the seminar, because I was still then already doing these interviews, that we call your great Argentinian hero, Gyula Kosice. So before coming to Miami, I looked at my, library and tried to find this book, which is the first book I read on Kosice, which we used at the time to do the interview. And it's extremely interesting how many parallels there are with his hidroespacial, La Ciudad Hidroespacial, the whole idea also of a flying city. Obviously, Kosice is a great Argentinian pioneer who since the 40s, sort of parallel to Fontana, developed amazing spatial experiments, was one of the co-founders of the Mahdi movement. And I just wanted to begin with the beginning and ask you a little bit to tell us about your hero Kosice and what inspired you.
Yeah. Well, it was, at that time I was in Argentina, still study architecture, and then somehow I got to know some friend had been in his studio, somehow also during the last years I was struggling a little bit to deal with a pretty conventional type of architecture. Anyway, it was an interesting thing. And then, I was I was teaching a little bit also the last years in the university also. And then I thought it would be a good thing to share with him the course. And then we invite him, and he was the first time that he came to the University of Architecture to give a lecture. And then we have a couple of reviews with students, and then from there, we build up like a small relationship. And I think so, it's like a fascinating when you read some of how he described it, the Ciudad Hidroespacial. I think so it goes really from a kind of a very wide aspect of a kind of a social, political engagement to also also maybe practically also and technically how he think or he imagine might be able to build. And I thought, it's like kind of it's a type of architecture also, that then later, was something pretty inspiring for me at that time, a little bit, which goes a little bit beyond the conventional architecture, which was at the moment over there.
And one of the things which is striking if one looks at the book is this whole idea of floating, is defying gravity. I mean, it's his hidroespacial structure is a floating city idea. It's lugares para vivir. It's basically places to live without gravity. There is also in 1958 a Escultura Flottante, which is a kind of a floating sculpture. And from the very beginning when we met, and I met you when you were still a student, there was already this very clear sort of driving force, one can say, in your work, which had to do with this idea of light materials, of floating materials. And I remember that it was actually one of your first big projects, and for the Architecture Biennale, still a student, you were invited to make a proposal for the Architecture Biennale in Venice. You proposed this very big project with hydrogel to actually cover the whole railway station area of Venice. So two questions really. First of all, if you can tell us a little bit, where are the beginnings of this, light material obsession, of this floating obsession, of this idea of defying gravity? Was there an epiphany where you suddenly, and then secondly, maybe to tell us more about this Venice project, which somehow marked the beginning of this manifestation?
I don't know if I can answer. It's always at the beginning, I think it's always kind of a network of relationship. Then there is maybe not really a striking point from where to start. But what I can tell you is recently I was in this parabolic flight when you kind of get into a plane and then you make 20 parabols and then you're without gravity for even, it's like a 20, 25 seconds every time that and the first parabola is you're in the gravity of the moon. The second parabola is the gravity of Mars, and the parabolas which get a bit later then is completely weightless. And then it's crazy. It's for example, if you push yourself with this speed, you're smashed to the other place. It's really a crazy experience. And then I don't know. I'm always thinking now when I'm related maybe lately with some work of Fraiotto, also with some other architects, I've always maybe I'm interested to maybe to explore also the, other possibility, another dimension also. Maybe it's the same building, the same structure, but it's also how you can get it like under another dimension also, no? How you can explore it also with another situation. Does it mean, yeah, a little bit like this. And then in relation with the aerogel, it's something which is, it's a material which having been invented already like almost 80 years ago. And I was just fascinated because it's the lightest material ever on Earth today. And then, well, I have 7 worldwide records on different interesting properties. And I was always fascinated with what will happen if, a difference with Gyula Kosice, his kind of the system of propulsion of this kind of flying city, how he's thinking is very different of what I'm thinking different. It's more close what Fuller was thinking in the Cloud 9 project, which basically the possibility of flying is just only by the difference of temperature, which is produced by the solar energy. And Gyula is, it's like through a process of electrolysis, and then, it's a different way of how we might have this city floating in the sky. But, it then was very simple with some engineers in Frankfurt and some other friends, we managed somehow to start to think of what will happen if we could have this material applied to lighter than air vehicles. And basically, yeah, from there, we built a few samples and a few prototypes and a few ideas. That's lately, yeah, we are looking forward.
And how would you mark this transition? Because obviously you start out in the architecture world and you are now somehow back in the architecture world because you have proposals which are, clearly architectural. Yet at the same time, you're very present in the art world, you do exhibitions. Would you see your practice as both an artist and an architect, or does the distinction not matter?
Yeah, I would say it doesn't matter for me, distinction so much. It's like it's more about, it's like with who you are having a dialogue, right? Which make then the difference, and, a little bit, I've been like a back and forth a little bit all the time between, mostly these 2 disciplines, but, now I'm, now I'm doing 2 commissions with Biology Institute, one in Bristol and another one now maybe here it come up in Tampa, and then pretty much talking with scientists which are in biology discipline. And then, I think so what defines the thing that you do is like with who you kind of are able to maintain a certain dialogue for a certain time. Then the rest is like, I don't care much if, in which kind of category then it falls. But the truth is, I feel comfortable also to talk in between.
So who besides Kosice would be your heroes? Because obviously Kosice is the first person you mentioned to me as being a great influence, but I was sort of curious. I know that Jonas Friedman is somebody who interests you. Yeah. Let's talk maybe about some more of your heroes.
Well, I think so, it's like I don't know. It's always like a kind of sometimes, like you talk, well, we have been just talking, Friedman, Fuller, I love many works of Dan Graham also, he have this room where it's past, present, continuous past, and then I think so that's a pretty amazing piece also. Who kind of I saw it at the Pompidou Center. I don't know which year it was, 98 or something like this. And I think so that was a really interesting piece also in relation about the work. And many. I don't know if from Argentina we could say Clorindo, Amancio Williams. There are many.
Clorindo Testa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But what interests you about him? He's a.
Well, also, it's like most of them is kind of also like they're not so defined, or they could do 2 or more things at the same time, right? I mean, also when we talk about Buckminster Fuller, right, is a person, which have kind of a broad spectrum of understanding some of the issues.
And what about Jona? Jona is obviously a permanent kind of inspiration, and he has always bridged art and architecture as a pioneering architect who lives in Paris. Is he somebody who still inspires you? Or? Yeah,
we have been now recently doing a show together at Cabaret Voltaire in Switzerland, and then it was pretty interesting the relationship, and also with Archigram, I've been studying also with Peter Cook instead of in Frankfurt, and that was interesting also to see the relationship of his ville spatiale, and then how we could really imagine to really take it off, and then we were working parallel of the thing, and then one thing influenced the other one. But I think so. Yes, he's a great inspiration also for me in this sense.
Now, last week I was in Berlin and I saw your extraordinary show, which is actually the occasion also for the publication of the book Cloud Cities, which is being launched these days. And many questions about these clouds. One thing I was particularly curious is, because one of the early projects which somehow, where you told me about clouds, was this Airport City project, no? When you somehow got interested in clouds. And last year we had a panel where you participated, which was about the connection between cloud architecture and cloud computing. How did your clouds begin? Because it's more than a recurrent thing now. It's almost like a cloud obsession.
Well, I always think it's like a cloud specific, maybe instead of size specific would be cloud specific, and that's how maybe specific would get. But one thing which I don't know, because I remember now what we have been talking. I remember there was in a panel people who were trying to, with Olafur, you remember, was the solar plane, and there was started a discussion about how this cloud might take off and how by carrying people. And one of the things, you know, is like I don't know how many of you have been flying in a balloon, and usually what I do is solar balloons, which fly only with there are only 5, I think so 7 at the moment in the world. It means it's just a balloon who can heat up by the energy of the sun, and then you can get up in the air. And what's something which is very strange is like you never experience wind. There is never wind up there because you move with the wind. For example, if you are going in a sailing boat, in a bicycle, walking, whatever, but there is always like a sense of wind. But when you are up there and then you move, is this something which is? It might. I'm speculating. You know, if you might generate a space, you know, you don't need to open or close the doors because there will be never winding going through. And then, that's what I'm at the moment working on, thinking about it.
Yeah, there is an image we looked at before, which is at the Calder studio in Saché, which is something you said you're particularly excited about, which is a really functioning solar balloon. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, it's a little bit what...
I hope you can all see it.
But it's made with, in this case, it's half transparent, half black.
Circulate it.
And then...
have a look.
And then, it's just like with €300 2 person a weekend, you can build it up by yourself. Now we are kind of working also with a Museo Solar, which is made instead of these plastic bags with tape, or we reuse plastic bags. And basically, it's very, very simple. You just usually it's 15 microns. It's very thin plastic, and you tape it together. And then usually it's very early in the morning that is best to take off, and then you can elevate a person in the air for €300. It's very cheap. But it's.
And what are you going to do with it now? What's next? You're going to mass produce it, or?
No, but basically, there are these instructions that people can download, and then you can build it by yourself, this balloon. And now with Museo Solar, I think so is going to receive an invitation in Cuba, in the Biennale in Cuba, and maybe we're going there, and then, it's a project kind of keep traveling. It's not that one, it's the other one that we do with a patching, like reusing plastic bags, which, it's a kind of traveling project somehow.
Now, before we started the conversation here in public, we had a cup of tea and discussed about your epiphanies and your invention. And I asked you about the aerogel invention in Venice and your early inventions and you as an inventor. And it was kind of really interesting because you said that it's difficult to sort of pin down your practice by saying these were the 2 or 3 main epiphanies. To quote you, you said it's more kind of a network of relations. And visiting last week your show in Berlin at the Hamburger Bahnhof, which is really like a city within the city. It's a cloud city. There are all these clouds and bubbles in relation, forming a network. It's actually interesting. It reminded me of a show Mario Merz did in the 80s called Città Irreale, when he was invited by Harald Seemann, and he did a city of all the igloos, because he made igloos and igloos and igloos and igloos. He made many igloos, and then at some point they brought together all his igloos, and Mario built a city of all the igloos, and it became like an utopic city. And I was suddenly wondering when I was in Berlin, that is maybe connected, because suddenly you've been doing so many clouds all over the world in museums and galleries, and suddenly one sees all these clouds in the Hamburger Bahnhof, and they form a city. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this network of relations, about these bubbles and clouds, and how they come together in Berlin as a city.
yeah, well, one of the things that I'm looking forward now is like instead to have them all spread around in the space, maybe you can put them all together inside a bag and then have many spheres inside one big net and then try to take off. But one thing is like, what I always like is like it really depends, for example, also the work in Venice is something which it depends on the tension that you put into the work that, you know, it may be able to generate a certain shape or something. You know, it's basically, the material is always air, no? It's like something which is something, and also when people are entering in this, it's like, you know, the people ask, when they ask is what is made of, and I say, well, it's air. This is the major material which is up there, and also when you fly in a solar balloon, well, it's a different temperature of air that it might lift you up, right? It's like usually 15 degrees of temperature that you need to get up and fly up in the sky. I mean, when you quantify a little bit, and then the other one are these ropes also, which is something which you can really like stretch it to one direction, but you know the shape, it always will depend about the tension that you put to the material. And a little bit, you know, I like this, you know, this idea of that if you don't work inside a museum, you know, maybe some of the rope can become this idea of the space elevator. You know, you can kind of start to connect stars and galaxies and get a little bit out of this planet also. I mean, you know, like, and also maybe, you know, when you are sitting inside, and hopefully it works in kind of in another level, but you know, there was this, I'm happy about the recent text of Bruno Latour when he wrote now. And then, you know, this experience of sharing a space which is very sensible of the movement of the other spaces. It means if you enter in one of these spheres that we are in Berlin, you know, if I will be moving like this, all of you will be moving. And when you move, I will be moving because it's pretty unstable, right? The volume of air is pretty high. Does it mean there is kind of you know, codependencies of the movement that each of us produce into the environment, who kind of, you know, build up maybe this, you know, hidden, and somehow is also speechless. You know, people are always complaining that I do not learn German so properly, but, you know, when you reach, you know, having and entering these spaces, I like this idea of you know, it's like almost like a body language that you are exchanging one person to the other one, and yeah, it happens sometimes.
And then it's also the question of utopia, because, you know, when Mario Merz put together all the igloos, it became a kind of a utopic city. And obviously the concept of utopia plays also a role in your work. You say in the catalog, and there is a kind of a very polyphonic interview in the catalog, because many different people are asking you questions, so it's a interview of polyphony. And I think it's Marion, the director of Düsseldorf, she asked you about utopia, and you said that you understand utopia again to be very urgent, and you then quote Slavoj Žižek. So utopia, extropia, atopia, utopia realizable, dystopia, you say you need them all. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about utopia and these all kinds of other utopias.
Yeah, utopia, dystopia, you know, it's like I always kind of related a little bit with you know, it's like when you go to sleep, you know, it's like 1/3 of your life also you sleep, and you are kind of in another parallel reality where you are standing everyday life. But then, you know, and all you have, you can have good dreams or bad dreams, but you need to have bad dreams also, or, you know, to then make a difference of other ones, and then you might be following some other. But I think so, I mean, I like this idea of you know, when Aaron Huxley, you know, describe also, you know, it's something that, you know, it's like something which you might describe a reality which might happen or not, but at the same time you have something which you could, you know, start to appreciate or not. And I think so this, I think so, you know, Fuller also was very advocate that we might need it, you know, it's like as I might need to go to sleep every day, you know, and being somewhere else, you know. I think so it's something which is necessary, at least for me.
Your utopias, because I was wondering if you have any unrealized projects now, you know, looking at your cloud city and all these built clouds. I was wondering if you have dreams, projects which have been too big to be realized. What are Tomás Saraceno utopias?
Well, you know, like going back at what you were saying, you know, when Buckminster Fuller talked about there is a project, because now there will be a conversation in Berlin with Soshi Sadao, who have been the person who worked with Fuller for many years about this project, which is called Cloud 9. And basically it's a sphere of 1.2 miles diameter. It's a kind of a pretty big sphere. And then this with 1 degree of temperature between the inside and the outside, you know, now, you know, being inside here and with this air condition, but we could lift up in the air. It means, I think so. That's something pretty interesting. That could be interesting to explore a little bit, or the idea of the space elevator, or it's like I don't know. Lately, I've been working, with these black widows, and then trying to explore the relationship between, many astrophysicians. They try to describe the origin of the universe as a three-dimensional spider web, right? And then we have been very busy trying to scan a three-dimensional spider web, which was a black widow, which somehow started with Daniel for the Venice Biennale, and then later we continue in a Bonnier's exhibition in Stockholm. And yeah, we were talking, mostly it was conversation with Folke Sprinkler with the Max Planck Institute, that they have like the best simulation of the origin of the universe, which is called the Millennium Simulation. And then try to discover, through, I don't know, because what they always do is like they have this geometrical construction, and then always when they try to describe how the geometry of the universe have been formed, they usually always describe it as a parallel of a three-dimensional spider web. But what I realized later is that nobody knows really the geometry of a three-dimensional spider web. It means it took us 2 years together with many different scientific institutions to try to have a method of how we could scan or have a 3D model for then later we could rebuild it. And then somehow we succeeded now. There have been like 4 scientific papers from the arachnologists and many other people, which is something funny because, it's like, for example, when you think, it's like 94% of all what we know is dark energy and black matter, and only 4% is like planets, humans, hydrogen, helium, only 4%. 94% we cannot even name, we don't know what is. It means it's funny when they kind of always try to relate, the universe with a three-dimensional spider web, which at the same time you can find in many corners of many houses, but at the same time is so unknown as the universe is. It means, like a human trend, they have been kind of making an analogy which is so close to us, but at the same time so unknown, which I mean, I found it pretty interesting, the parallel. And
that leads us also to the connection to science, because obviously when we met, there was always the link to architecture, to urbanism, to utopian architecture. You came to Europe, you once told me to find Peter Cook, so that was somehow the reason to come to the Städelschule. And at the same time, there's obviously the connection to science, and your mother is a biologist, and often it's been said that the 21st century, is a biological century, and you obviously more and more increasingly also work with scientists. You work with NASA. I think for K21 you work with a scientist called Peter Jäger and a spider society. So I was curious if you can tell us a little bit more about this, connection to science. It's also very interesting if you ever collaborated with your mother. Yeah.
Well, maybe in the belly of my mother, but I don't know. It's like no, from Argentina usually, and here now. I was the other day in Tampa again, and then I was fascinated because I like very much these Tillandsia. Are these plants who can live in the air, and they do not have a root somehow. Or when they have a root, it's only like a kind of to attach, but usually it's like a rootless. For at least the Tillandsius neoide, which is the family from Bromelaceae. But in Argentina we see them like almost here, but here you see more in the tree. They usually grow in the cables of electricity, and that's something maybe which interests me on find some relations over there. But with my mother directly, I never have worked yet. But yes, with many other institutions and own organization.
Science, architecture, there's obviously also the connection to philosophy, and that's something we discussed a lot with Daniel Birnbaum, because after Venice, where we met, you went straight away to the Städelschule and studied there, and now it's actually an architect, Nikolaus Hirsch, who is also here. He is the dean, and that when you studied there, it was Daniel Birnbaum, who is a philosopher. And it's interesting, if one looks at philosophy, there's obviously your dialogue with Bruno Latour, which is about networks, and that you already spoke about. But then there is also this new movement in Europe called speculative realists. And I was sort of curious if you could talk a little bit about this sort of whole connection, because you said that you're interested in matter and antimatter. And but I'd ask you again what Daniel asked you. Are you a speculative realist?
I don't know. I think so. The question is good over there. When I answer, I'm interested in matter and antimatter. I think so. It's a little bit, which I was pointing out a little bit before. I think so. You know, there are like a, I don't know, like a pretty unconscious ways of how I operate also, and then I think so. You know, it's like sometimes too much binded to a certain reality which we think we might know, but you know, it's like I like to think like like reality is like a process that is built through a dialogue. And, you know, we might be inventing a reality now while we are talking about something. And it's something which is always like a kind of in a constant process of evolution, right? And this is a little bit also like, when we are trying to define, my engagement in different disciplines, I think so that, it's like you might invent another reality every time, and every time that I confront with another discipline, you might find that there is a completely different reality. When you talk with some people from the art world, it's really different reality of another one. This means, it's like this idea of dialoguing, and then through the dialogue, you kind of keep building this type of realities, which I find sometimes, is like pretty much like a self-contained, or they need this kind of a border relationship of you can find in any natural system that they need to survive from themselves. But it's like it's very interesting, when you break, and you from one reality to the other reality, and then sometimes something happens. And I think so. The project, for example, of the spider web of the scanning, which it's like then when I was at NASA, I met Gilles Clement, who is a kind of a chief scientist who make many projects for the International Space Station. And I say, hey, but we discovered this model of. I was very busy on the relationship between the three-dimensional spider web and the origin of the universe. And then he was very interesting on trying to, because then when I approached him, he said, well, why we don't put spiders on the ISS? And then we wrote together with 4 scientists, himself and an architect, a proposal for sending spiders on the International Space Station. This means what will be very interesting is to see how spiders weave a web in a non-gravitational environment in relationship of how they build the web here. This means there was something interesting of the project that then later we build it in a house, in a room like is 8 meter by 6 meter, that each of us, have a kind of a very particular interest to push the project. And this, I think, so it worked kind of pretty well. I mean, the dialogue, it functions somehow.
Now, your work obviously very often goes beyond, the size of the museum. It's got the scale of a city or the scale of planets. And I was kind of wondering, I mean, you exhibit in museums a lot, you exhibit in galleries, art fairs, and then you go into architecture and develop your architectural projects. But I was wondering if you've got a kind of a dream museum or a kind of a context where you would imagine your work to be best, a sort of a sort of in a Malraux sense, an imaginary museum, because you once told me about the Museo Aerosolar, which stands for another kind of notion of space.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, I like kind of a very kind of sophisticated material like aerogel, but sometimes, and then you might think, it's like a little bit speculative, like, with Kosich also, the system of propulsion that you might have is kind of very complicated. But at the same time, it's like sometimes you find like and you realize with just a normal, simple plastic bag, you can take off, and for very, very, very low cost. And then, a little bit the critique from the piece that we did in Calder, and another one that we were buying the plastic rolls. Then with Museo Solari, something also, it's a project which have been traveling for quite a while now. And basically what it happened is like people donate plastic bags, which have them in their kitchenette, and then and in each place, it kind of function a little bit in a different situation. When it was in Colombia, in Medellin, we were working with a graphic designer who was teaching in a school, and then kids start to draw. When we were at Minneapolis, we worked with some scientists of NASA, and we were doing a cut-down mechanism of how to control the altitude of the museum when we'll reach and get in conflict with the airspace. Then you might need to sign a SAIN, and then you have to control the altitude. And I think so. What I like is like pretty much this collaborative spirit, and maybe come back a little bit about Yona Friedman and how he's thinking about the way of engaging, or how the relationship with architecture with the client and all his his relationship, which I think so from there is a process which, it's more a process than the object by itself. And I think so what is interesting about Museo Solar, or this piece, which is basically, just if you don't know, but it's a big balloon who just fly with solar energy, and there are many, many plastic bags from many different countries, because the piece is kind of, and I like to think about a museum also, because it's a collection of plastic bags, basically, which kind of does not have a size of a limit. This means it's a museum who can enlarge as much as you donate more plastic bags. This means does not have really the kind of and does not have a location also, because it's a collection who travel from one place to the other one. And then also what is very funny is, like, because basically many people sometimes they think, well, but it's pretty commercial, because you can see plastic bags from many supermarket chains and other things. But for example, when we came back from Medellin with Museo Solar, then we were blowing up the balloon, and then some people will be looking at some of the plastic and say, hey, but what's that? Is that it was a very famous supermarket chain of supermarket in Colombia, but in Medellin, in France, suddenly was a very famous labor record from the 60s. I mean, the interpretation from the same plastic bag, when it traveled from one place to the other one, it completely changed the meaning from one culture to the other one. And at the same time, it's something, it's like when it's flying up in the sky, the plastic bag becomes really like a pixel. You don't see it anymore as an image. It means it's something like colorful that you cannot distinguish anymore. This means, it's like when I think a little bit, it's like I'm pretty much fascinated about the process of how this Museo Solar is working. It's like if I think like how a cloud city might be built, I'm interested maybe on, how maybe Linux have been built, or how Wikipedia have been built. But I'm also threatening is like, hey, we might be able not only to build like maybe an encyclopedia or a server or a program, but also to invent ourselves in a way and start to think of the way how we live, in a collaborative way, as Jonna maybe is thinking, But it's always difficult. I'm trying to look forward for a type of engagement, and also, it's like when you surf today in the internet, you don't know so much about from what this web page is. You kind of lose the conscience about there is a kind of a transnational, political, social dimension that you have while experiencing surfing on the internet, who might go a little bit beyond your national border division. You're from Argentina, Germany, or Italy. And I think so, maybe while people, we might be gaining some kind of experience that maybe, hopefully, we could be able to catalyze, and we could start to build something also which is beyond our political and social division of the country where we are today.
Our last question, Thomas, I wanted to ask you is about this very multi-layered landscape you're building, because I was asking you earlier, after this exhibition in Berlin, what are the current, preoccupation, and you showed me this drawing here of a very expansive kind of landscape, which seems to be without limits. Can you tell us about this?
That's a crazy project. Hopefully we're gonna build it now. It's a kind of a landscape. It's like a 3 level of a mesh, which basically we're again like working with 3 different type of webs. And what we are doing is kind of a hybrid situation. I mean, the question that we were posing with Peter Jäger, with a scientist who is specialized in spiders, was like it's kind of a little bit a learning process also. But we put a type of spider, for example, a Cytophora, which is a spider who can make a dome tent web, and then we take out the spider and we put another type of spider. And the question is like how a spider might be able to weave a web on top of the other existing web. It's kind of hybrid between 2 different webs, which usually in nature you might not find this, hybridization between 2 different spider type of web. And then the arachnology was really excited. He said, wow, that will be very interesting. Now we did the experiment, and then what we did is like we leave 2 longer the Tegenaria, which is a house spider, on top of the other one, and then it really kind of took over and it camouflaged. But maybe a little bit what is interesting also there is like, spiders, most of them are blind and they do not see what they are building. which I think so. And then basically they know the distance that you are having between you and me just by the vibration that they are feeling into the web, which somehow, you know, is go back maybe to a little bit the project that was in Berlin and about what we were explaining about this kind of process of synchronicity, I like to think, no? It's like, you know, when you walk in a bridge, there is a moment that everybody kind of step, and then there is a vibration what is happening there. But there is always like a critical mass, you know, it's like always like I'm thinking about how much people can stand the city, you know, or how much people can stand a certain situation until it start to vibrate to a certain extent that you recognize the other one, they are experiencing maybe something similar to what you are experiencing. It means, yeah, basically it's kind of a, you know, it's like it goes to the direction of, you know, thinking how we might be able to build a cloud city, of how we imagine, but, you know, I hope so it's sensible enough to, you know, to have this experience of a space which vibrate according with other people. 5 minutes.
I'm aware that we are running out of time, but I'm very grateful, Tomás, for this wonderful conversation. And rather than now doing opening it actually to the floor, I suggest that we now have the book signing, because Tomás will sign books, because this is not only a conversation, but this is also a book signing. And it's this extraordinary book, Cloud Cities, which you can find over there. And then, you know, if you've got individual questions, you can ask Tomás individually. Thank you all very much. And Tomás, thank you so much.
Thank you.